Okay, guys, what we're going to look at now is solving quadratic inequalities. Okay, now to begin with, the first step in this is just revising how to solve quadratic equations, because I'm sure by now many of you have forgotten how to do this. So, firstly, the general formula for a quadratic equation is the function of x, or it could be y, is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, now we will be looking at two different types, or three different types, but two categories of quadratic equations. The first is when there are two terms. Okay, so the first type of quadratic equations are when there are two terms. These are the easy ones to solve because we either have ax squared plus bx is equal to 0, or we will have ax squared plus c is equal to 0. Now, for the first type, ax squared plus bx equals 0, we just factorize. Okay, so the strategy here is to factorize. Okay, so an example. If I had 5x squared plus 10x is equal to 0, then we can factorize. So this is the one most people tend to get a bit confused about it. They stuff it up. They look at these and they go, oh, I don't know what to do. But straight away you should be able to see that 5 and x are factors of both 5x squared and 10x. So we can say 5x is our factor, and then we just have 5x squared divided by 5x, which is x, plus 10x divided by 5x is 2, is equal to 0. Okay, and as I said, many people stuff this up. Many people make mistakes with this because they just don't know what to do. And this is actually one of the simplest types. Okay, then we can say 5x is equal to 0, or x plus 2 is equal to 0. Because remember, when you have, where am I going to write this? When we have a times b is equal to 0, we know that either a equals 0 or b equals 0. Okay? So at this point we can now say therefore x is equal to 0 or x is equal to minus 2. Okay? So that's the first type with two terms. The second type with two terms is when we have something like ax squared plus c equals 0. Now, this we can just solve with algebra. Okay, so this is a nice easy one. Solve with algebra. So for example, we might have 2x squared plus 30, we're going to say minus here, minus 32 equals 0. Okay, and I'll explain why in a minute. So the first step here is that we're going to use algebra. We're going to put the 32 onto the other side. So plus 32 on both sides of the equals. Okay, so on the left we now have 2x squared, and on the right we now have 32. The next step is we divide by 2 to isolate the x squared, and we're now going to have x squared is equal to 16. Okay, at this point, we just need to take the square root of both sides. You know that when you do that, you will get a positive and a negative answer. So x equals the square root of 16, or x equals the negative square root of 16. Okay, so x is equal to 4, or x is equal to negative 4. Okay, so this is what we do when we solve with algebra. Now, I mentioned back when I started writing this question that if it was plus 32 it wouldn't work, and I'm just going to do up the top here why this is the case. So if we had 2x squared plus 32 is equal to 0, okay, we would then get 2x squared equals negative 32, x squared equals negative 16, and x is equal to the square root of negative 16. Okay, and we know that this is not possible. Okay, there is no real answer to this. We can't do it. Okay, so we don't do the square root of a negative at the moment. When you get into the upper years and you start working with complex numbers and imaginary numbers, you'll see that this is actually possible, but for now it's not. Okay, so this is what we do when we have two terms. So we either have ax squared plus bx equals 0, where we don't have a c term, or ax squared plus c equals 0, where we don't have a b term. Okay, we can't be missing the a term because then it's no longer a quadratic equation. All right, the other situation is when we have three terms. Okay, so we can also have three terms in our quadratic equation. So that would be either y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, or something similar. Okay, so quite often the a term will be a 1, and that makes it a lot easier. Now, strategies for when there's three terms. Okay, the first thing you should always try to factorize first. Okay, so we always try this first. Always try to factorize first. And the reason why is because factorizing is always the quickest way to do this if it's possible. Okay, so for example, if we have, x squared plus 10x plus 24, I'll go for the nice cliche one, is equal to 0. Okay, so we always try and factorize first. And one point I have forgotten to make is it must be equal to 0. Okay, so the equation must be equal to 0. Okay, that property that we looked at before where we said a times b equals 0, a equals 0, or b equals 0. This only works if it's equal to 0, okay? Because if it's equal to anything else, we don't know for certain that one of the terms must be 0, okay? So, firstly, the equation must be equal to 0. That's the most important thing with this, okay? Now we can factorize. So, you might remember that what we do is we look for two numbers that multiply to give 24 and add to give 10. So I'm going to do this the long way for now, just in case people have forgotten. So they need to multiply to give 24 and they need to add to give 10. Okay, so numbers that multiply to give 24, we have 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. Okay, then we also have minus 1 times minus 24, minus 2 times minus 12, etc. I'm not going to bother doing all of those, okay, because in this case I know it's not going to be a negative one. All right, we have three positive terms, so we're not going to be using negatives. So add them together. 1 plus 24 is 25, 2 plus 12 is 14, 3 plus 8 is 11, 4 plus 6 is 10, minus 1 plus minus 24 is minus 25, etc. Okay, now you should be able to see we wanted them to multiply to give 24. Well, that's everything. They had to add to give 10, and in this case we're using this row here, which means our numbers are 4 and 6. So when we factorize now, we have x plus 4, x plus 6 is equal to 0. Okay? Now, we know that we now have an a times b equals 0 situation. So, x plus 4 equals 0, or x plus 6 equals 0. X is equal to minus 4, or x is equal to minus 6. Okay, so this is what happens when we factorize first. Okay, it takes 3 or 4 lines of work, that's it. Okay, it's quite straightforward, it's quite easy. If you can't factorize, that's when you need to look for other options, okay? So we have 2 other options. So if you can't factorize, if factorizing is not possible, then either complete the square or alternatively, you can also use the quadratic formula. And it's your choice which one of those you would prefer to do. Both of them work perfectly fine. For many people, they just prefer to go with the quadratic formula because they make fewer mistakes. But some of you may think, hey, I'd rather do completing the square. Okay, so let's quickly look at both methods. We're going to use the same equation that we had here. So x squared plus 10x plus 24. Okay, so firstly we'll do completing the square. Okay, so we have x squared plus 10x plus 24 is equal to 0. We'll complete the square over here, and we are going to use the quadratic formula over here. Okay, so completing the square. Now, you should remember with completing the square that we want, obviously a square. So the first thing I've always told you to do is look at what b divided by 2 is equal to. So your b term here is 10, so 10 over 2, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. Okay, so we have x squared plus 10x, and as I said, we move the plus 24 over here out of the way. Then what we are going to do is we're going to add 5 squared and minus 5 squared with a net change, an overall change of 0. Okay, this part here can now become x plus 5 squared. Okay, minus 25 plus 24 is equal to 0. Okay, so nice and straightforward so far. So then we get x plus 5 squared minus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, now we can look at solving it. We've already completed the square. Now we can solve. So we have x plus 5 squared is equal to 1. If we move the 1 to the other side, you take the square root of both sides. So we get x plus 5 equals 1, or x plus 5 equals negative 1. So therefore we are going to get x is equal to minus 4, or x is equal to minus 6. And that's the same answer we got back up here when we just factorized. Okay, but you can see it was a much longer process. Okay, now with the quadratic formula, we'll do the same question. Okay, so x squared plus 10x plus 24 is equal to 0. The quadratic formula, you will remember, is x is equal to negative b plus the square root of d over 2a, or x is equal to negative b minus the square root of d over 2a. Okay, now d is equal to b squared minus 4ac. Okay, and that's the discriminant. Remember, it tells us how many solutions the quadratic formula has. Okay, so let's have a look at it. So b, we're going to start by calculating d. So d is equal to b squared. So 10 squared minus 4 times a, in this case, is 1, because there's really a nice happy little 1 here in front of the x squared. So 4 times 1 times c, which was 24. Okay, so it's 100 minus 4 times 24 should be 96. That's not right, is it? Yeah, 96. Okay, so d is equal to 4. All right, so x is equal to negative b, so negative 10, plus the square root of 4 over 2a, so 2, or x is equal to negative 10 minus the square root of 4 over 2. Okay, so negative 10 plus the square root of 4 is 2 over 2, or x is equal to negative 10 minus 2 over 2. Minus 8 over 2 gives us an answer of x is equal to minus 4, or minus 12 over 2 gives us an answer of x is equal to minus 6. And again, these are the same answers that we got through both the completing the square method and also through factorizing. But you can see here that factorizing is far quicker, okay? So that's why I say always try to factorize first, because it's far quicker than going through all of these steps, and you're also far less likely to make a mistake, okay? So that's it for solving quadratic equations. This was revision. You've done this all before plenty of times, so it shouldn't be too bad for you. Yeah, please practice it because you're going to need it when we start doing solving quadratic inequalities.